Pilot refuses to greet black man in first class, regrets it when he sees his name on the plane's ownership papers. Imagine you're settling comfortably into your luxurious first-class seat, anticipating a pleasant flight and some well-deserved rest. Suddenly, a tense hush falls over the cabin. You notice the pilot marching through, glancing from passenger to passenger until he fixes a cold stare on one man, a successful black entrepreneur, offering not a single word of welcome or courtesy. Little does the pilot know just how big a mistake he's making. By the end of this journey, when the true identity of that passenger is revealed, it will rock the pilot's world to its core and unleash a karma-fueled whirlwind no one could have predicted. Captain Gregory Halston prided himself on his reputation as one of Global Skies Airlines' most experienced pilots. For nearly 2 decades, he had flown countless miles across oceans and continents, building a solid professional record. He considered himself disciplined, punctual, and unflinchingly by the book. Yet beneath that gleaming exterior lay a subtle bias he rarely acknowledged. It was the kind of prejudice that never roared out in obvious slurs, but instead simmered in slight sneers, dismissive tones, and unspoken assumptions. Over time, Halston had become so accustomed to these small, casual displays of bias that he barely noticed them anymore. On that particular morning at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, Captain Halston strode confidently through the bustling terminal. He was scheduled to command Global Skies Flight 741 bound for Los Angeles on a Boeing 747-1 of the airline's prized jumbo jets. Passengers bustled around him, anxious families and excited solo travelers, each preoccupied with their own journeys. As Halston neared the gate, he nodded curtly at the ground staff, exchanged a few polite words with the flight attendants, and then made his way down the jet bridge. A swirl of conflicting energies hung in the air, the frenetic rush of passengers, the pilot's quiet sense of pride, and a looming tension that would soon explode into something far greater than anyone expected. Inside the airplane's cockpit, Halston set about his pre-flight checks. He flicked switches, tested instruments, and monitored readouts methodically. His first officer, Sheila DeWitt, a diligent and empathetic professional, worked alongside him. Sheila sensed Halston's mood, but decided not to press him with small talk. They had a job to do, and she was determined that no distractions or tensions mar the safety of their flight. Meanwhile, the cabin crew was already showing passengers to their seats. Among them was Marcus Thompson, a strikingly poised black man in his mid-30s, dressed in a crisp navy suit. He walked with a confidence that suggested both accomplishment and humility. Marcus exchanged polite greetings with the flight attendant, stowed his carry-on, and settled into a coveted first-class seat. First class, on Global Skies Boeing 747, was immaculate, plush seats, ample legroom, and a quiet ambience that felt worlds apart from the busy hustle of coach. Usually, the pilot would greet at least a portion of the first-class passengers as a courtesy, especially those traveling on special business or with the airline's highest tier status. But when Halston finally rose from the cockpit to do his perfunctory round, something about Marcus caught his eye, and not in a good way. It was the start of an unspoken standoff that would change both their lives. Halston paused, scanning the first-class cabin. He greeted a retired couple traveling to Los Angeles for their anniversary, offering them a warm smile and a friendly handshake. Moving on, he had a cheerful exchange with a frequent flyer he recognized from a previous trip. But as he approached Marcus's seat, Halston's demeanor flickered from polite cordiality to a colder, more standoffish posture. Marcus, for his part, returned the pilot's gaze with an easy nod, expecting a routine greeting. Instead, Halston offered only a brief, almost dismissive dip of his head. No smile, no introduction. No welcome aboard. It was enough for Marcus to register a quiet shock. He had travelled extensively, often first class, and was accustomed to at least a baseline courtesy. Yet here he was met with a chilly reception that carried an unmistakable subtext. Halston quickly moved on, as though Marcus were invisible. The pilot's actions didn't scream overt racism to the casual observer, but to those who had experienced subtle forms of discrimination. It was glaring. A simple greeting withheld can speak volumes about buried prejudice. Marcus, though momentarily rattled, kept his composure. He reminded himself that sometimes it was better to let small slights roll off. He had no idea that fate was about to roll them right back onto Captain Halston in ways neither man could anticipate. As first-class passengers continued to board, a few of them observed the frosty exchange. Nobody wanted to cause a scene. After all, the pilot had ultimate authority on the plane. But a middle-aged gentleman, seated a few rows behind Marcus, shook his head in disapproval, recognizing prejudice when he saw it. Another passenger whispered to her seatmate, quietly asking if everything was all right. Marcus, ever composed, merely said, "I'm fine, thank you," and tried to focus on the task he had at hand, preparing for a business meeting in Los Angeles that could define his next big move in the corporate world. Marcus Thompson was the CEO of his own tech startup, Technova Solutions, and he was also something of an angel investor. He had partnered with countless other emerging companies over the years, turning them from fledgling ideas into booming businesses. In fact, he was en route to LA, partly for a major conference, and partly for an even more confidential rendezvous with top Global Skies executives. A strategic investment was on the table, one that would see him acquiring a significant stake in the airline. This was not information he bandied about casually, nor did he feel the need to flaunt his wealth. He believed in quiet confidence, letting accomplishments speak for themselves rather than crowing about them. Meanwhile, Halston returned to the cockpit with a subconscious sense of satisfaction. He had maintained his demeanor, certain that he had given no reason for official complaint. In his mind, a dismissive greeting was a far cry from an overt offense. But prejudice is rarely about loud proclamations. Sometimes it's the subtlety that cuts the deepest. And sometimes it's that subtlety that leads to the biggest karmic fallout. The flight started smoothly enough. The Boeing 747 taxied down the runway, engines roaring, and soared into the clear morning sky. Seatbelt signs illuminated. Trays were stowed, and flight attendants delivered the safety demonstration with practiced precision. Marcus gazed out the window, letting the sprawling cityscape of Atlanta grow smaller and smaller beneath him. About half an hour into the flight, the seatbelt sign clicked off, and the cabin crew began their service. In first class, they presented a menu of gourmet meal options, along with an offer of champagne or fresh juice. Marcus politely requested a glass of orange juice while he perused some notes for his upcoming business presentations. He was working on a new software partnership with a major film studio in Hollywood, which could potentially revolutionize how data analytics and virtual effects were integrated in big-budget movies. It was an exciting prospect, one that reaffirmed just how far Marcus had come. Ironically, he also had an upcoming meeting with one of the vice presidents at Global Skies, a meeting that had been arranged under strict confidentiality. Marcus didn't want the staff or crew to realize who he was or why he was traveling. He wanted an unfiltered view of how things really operated at Global Skies beyond the PR facade. It was a sort of secret shopper scenario, except on a multi-million-dollar scale. The pilot's subtle rudeness would inadvertently prove to be the unfiltered glimpse. Marcus sought and more. Meanwhile, up in the cockpit, Captain Halston was reviewing weather reports and adjusting to a minor shift in flight path to avoid some turbulence brewing over the Midwest. He chatted sparingly with First Officer DeWitt, who tried to keep conversation light. Sheila had noticed Halston's frosty greeting toward the passenger in first class, but in an environment where rank and authority were paramount, she chose caution. Confronting a superior for possible discriminatory behavior in such a high-stakes job could lead to messy conflicts. Still, the moment weighed on her. After an hour in flight, a quiet beep from the cockpit signaled a call from the lead flight attendant, Camila Reyes. "Captain, we have a passenger in first class who needs to speak to you about some concerns." Halston frowned. Passengers rarely asked to speak directly with the captain unless there was a significant problem. He cleared his throat. "What's the nature of the concern, Camila?" He silently hoped it wasn't about him. Camila paused. "He's asking about the Wi-Fi connectivity and some issues with the in-flight entertainment system. He specifically requested to speak with the captain about overall flight conditions too." Halston could tell that Camila was struggling to phrase the reason tactfully. In truth, Marcus Thompson wanted to ask more about the flight path, the airline's new safety protocols, and the business side of Global Skies. But Camila herself was not entirely sure why a passenger was so keen on those details. All she knew was that he'd politely made the request, and since he was in first class, the crew wanted to oblige. Halston considered this request with skepticism. He wasn't particularly thrilled at the idea of conversing further with the same passenger he had slighted. Yet, he also recognized he couldn't outright refuse such a conversation without drawing more attention to himself. So he relented, stating curtly that once they reached cruising altitude and all systems were stable, he would step back into the cabin. He made a mental note to keep the interaction as brief as possible, to do just enough to avoid complaints. In first class, Marcus was reflecting on his earlier exchange, or lack thereof, with the pilot. While Marcus had no burning desire to engage with Halston again, he did have legitimate questions about the flight's experience, especially given his interest in the airline's operations. Part of him wanted to see if the pilot's dismissive demeanor was a consistent pattern or simply a one-off. Another part of him recognized that if he was going to acquire a stake in Global Skies, he needed first-hand insight from the very people who ran the show. In the background, flight attendants bustled about, delivering warm towels and meal trays. Passengers indulged in movies or typed away on laptops. The hum of the engines was reassuring, a steady companion on long-haul journeys. Marcus took a sip of his orange juice, glanced down at his watch, and thought about how everything in life could change in just a matter of minutes. Little did he know just how dramatically it would for Captain Halston and for himself by the time they landed. 30 minutes later, Halston emerged from the cockpit with a neutral expression plastered on his face. He walked down the aisle, offered fleeting nods to a couple of first-class passengers, and finally stopped at Marcus's row. "You wanted to speak with me?" Halston asked, voice clipped. Marcus remained polite. "Yes, Captain, thank you for taking the time. I'm curious about the Wi-Fi connectivity issues. The flight map shows we're deviating slightly from the original route. Is that because of weather or something else?" Marcus kept his tone inquisitive, nothing confrontational. Halston answered in the same clipped monotone. "There's a weather front we're avoiding. The Wi-Fi signal can be spotty in certain regions depending on satellite coverage. It should improve once we clear the area." Marcus nodded. He followed up with a question about Global Skies' newly implemented safety features, something he'd read about in a press release. Halston's eyes flickered at the mention. Those are standard updates, part of an industry-wide improvement. Nothing unusual. Although his words were serviceable, His posture and lack of warmth continued to radiate the same subtle dismissiveness. Marcus took it in stride, but he couldn't help noticing how the pilot was more at ease with other passengers. A pang of disappointment struck him. He had hoped that perhaps Halston was just having a bad day, but it was clear the pilot's attitude was no mere mood, it was a preference. Finishing his string of questions, Marcus politely thanked Halston. The pilot barely inclined his head before stepping away. Yet, as Halston turned, he couldn't help noticing the business materials on Marcus's open laptop, spreadsheets referencing Global Sky's potential acquisition, slides detailing internal airline metrics, and a signature line reading, Marcus Thompson, Technova Solutions. For a fleeting second, Halston's brow furrowed. Why would a passenger have Global Sky's internal data on a personal device? The moment passed quickly, and Halston brushed it off. It was probably some random business pitch or an investor deck the passenger was preparing. He won't get far, Halston mused internally, if that's what he's up to. Marcus noticed Halston's fleeting glance and wondered if it registered. The pilot's demeanor suggested little real interest. If Halston had only known the significance of Marcus's presence, he might have treated this entire interaction with greater care. Marcus was on the brink of a deal that would grant him an influential voice in how Global Sky's airlines operated, including matters concerning staff conduct. Back in the cockpit, Halston slipped on his headset and resumed pilot duties, ignoring the gnawing sensation that perhaps something was off. There was no immediate crisis, just a faint tension threading its way through the flight unseen by most, but acutely felt by those most impacted. Fate, however, was about to bring it all to the surface. 2 hours into the flight, the weather front they were avoiding intensified. Dark clouds clustered like a menacing fortress, forcing the plane into a wider detour. Pockets of turbulence jostled the passengers. In economy, drinks rattled in plastic cups and overhead bins occasionally creaked. In first class, the turbulence was more muted, but still noticeable enough to disrupt any semblance of calm. Marcus closed his laptop, preferring not to risk it bouncing off the tray table. He glanced around at the other first-class passengers, some of whom were starting to look anxious. Quietly, he began reviewing some breathing techniques he'd learned years ago when dealing with flight stress. He wasn't particularly afraid of flying, but he found that mindfulness helped him stay centered, especially in tense situations. Up front, Halston and First Officer DeWitt were busy recalculating flight paths. DeWitt made sure to keep her voice steady over the intercom, reassuring passengers that the turbulence was normal, that they would be rerouting to maintain safety, and that service might be temporarily suspended until conditions improved. For a long stretch, the plane rattled and shook. Then, just as quickly, they broke through the worst of it, soaring into calmer skies. DeWitt exhaled a breath of relief, and Halston nodded in silent gratitude. It was moments like these that tested a pilot's skill, and ironically, they also laid bare deeper undercurrents of stress, personality, and hidden biases if one cared to look closely. When turbulence subsided, flight attendants resumed service. Camilla Reyes, the lead flight attendant, approached Marcus to see if he needed anything. He offered a polite smile and declined further drinks or snacks. He did, however, inquire how the rest of the cabin was faring, showing concern for other passengers. Camilla appreciated that he was considerate, not just self-focused. "Everyone's a bit shaken, but we're good," she replied. "We should have smoother skies for the rest of the trip." Marcus nodded, returning to his quiet study of business documents. With the threat of turbulence receding, he found his mind drifting back to the earlier slight from the pilot. He tried to shrug it off, but it clung to him. He had dealt with subtle racism before, at conferences, at high-end restaurants, even at hotel check-ins. People who saw only the color of his skin and not the breadth of his accomplishments. Marcus made it a point never to let bitterness anchor him. Instead, He used these experiences as fuel to drive his success, to open more doors for people like him. Still, it stung. He wondered if there might be a time on this flight for a more genuine conversation with the pilot. Little did Marcus know that soon enough, Captain Halston would be forced into a reckoning far more dramatic than a polite cabin conversation. The turbulence they had just passed was nothing compared to the storm of consequences heading Halston's way. As the flight neared its halfway point, one of the flight attendants discreetly approached Marcus. Her voice hushed. "Mr. Thompson, I was told by ground control that the Vice President of Corporate Relations for Global Skies might be reaching out to you shortly. We have a secure in-flight communication line set up if you'd like to take that call." She offered a friendly smile, though she was curious about this passenger's importance. Few travelers receive direct calls from airline executives mid-flight. Marcus nodded, thanking her. He stood and followed her to a small alcove near the front galley, where a private satellite phone was available for priority calls. The call connected, and on the other end was none other than Carla Hutchinson, the VP of Corporate Relations. She sounded upbeat, if a bit nervous. "Marcus, I hope the flight's treating you well." "How are things up there?" Marcus hesitated. He wasn't sure how to address the pilot issue without overshadowing the bigger picture of why he was traveling. "The flight is fine," he finally said. "We had some turbulence, but nothing out of the ordinary." He paused, debating how forthright to be. "I did have a somewhat chilly interaction with the captain, which surprised me. I don't want to make waves, but I should be honest about my experience." Carla's voice lowered. "I appreciate that, and I assure you we take all feedback seriously. Once you land, we'll meet and finalize the terms of your potential acquisition. But let's keep this pilot matter separate for now unless you feel it's urgent." Marcus decided to let it rest. "We'll talk more once I'm on the ground." He ended the call, a knot of anticipation forming in his chest. No matter how discreet he tried to be, the wheels of karma were already in motion. Returning to his seat, Marcus felt an undercurrent of tension building. He tried to refocus on the upcoming negotiations. There was a delicate dance at play. He was poised to purchase a considerable stake in Global Skies, enough to grant him a powerful voice in policy making and company culture. If the deal went through, he would be reviewing internal hiring practices, diversity training programs, and overall employee conduct. That meant individuals like Captain Halston would eventually land on his radar, even if the pilot had never singled him out. Now, Halston was well on his way to becoming Exhibit A of the kind of subtle prejudice Marcus wanted to address. Marcus couldn't help wondering if the universe or some higher power was orchestrating this fiasco to illustrate precisely what was at stake. He remembered a line his mother once said, "Sometimes people reveal their true colors right when you're in a position to change their entire world." He felt those words echo in his mind. In the cockpit, Halston remained oblivious to the gathering storm. He carried on with flight protocols, occasionally exchanging quick updates with DeWitt. He still felt a vague unease about the passenger in first class and the glimpses of Global Skies documents he'd spotted, but for now he shoved it aside. He had a flight to finish, and if he played his cards right, he'd never see Marcus Thompson again. The universe, however, had a different plan. An hour later, the plane began its initial descent toward Los Angeles. The sky was a gorgeous canvas of sunlit clouds, and the announcement came over the speaker, "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be preparing for landing soon. Please return to your seats and ensure your seat belts are fastened." Passengers stirred, some packing away laptops, others finishing beverages. A sense of anticipation filled the cabin as people readied themselves for what lay ahead on the ground. In the cockpit, Halston and DeWitt performed their approach checklist. They requested vectoring from air traffic control, guiding the 747 into a smooth descent. The LAX runways sprawled out below, a testament to the scale of one of the country's busiest airports. Halston took a moment to admire the cityscape in the distance. Despite his personal flaws, flying was still his passion. Commanding a massive aircraft to land safely was an art form as much as a technical skill. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, inhaling a steady breath. He thought about his mother, his mentors, and all the people who had helped him rise to the place he was today. For them, he wanted to keep pushing boundaries, opening pathways for others who might face discrimination like he had. The friction with Halston underscored the importance of that mission. In minutes, they would all be on the ground. Little did Halston suspect that in those same minutes, his entire perception of power and respect was about to be challenged in ways that would leave him reeling. The landing itself was textbook. Tires screeched lightly on the runway, and the airplane decelerated smoothly, guided by Halston's steady hands. DeWitt announced their arrival. "Welcome to Los Angeles International Airport. Local time is 3:17 p.m. We hope you enjoyed your flight." The usual bustle followed, passengers unbuckling seatbelts, phones chiming as they reconnected to cellular networks. Cabin pressure equalized, and flight attendants prepared to open the doors once the jet bridge was in place. As the aircraft taxied to its designated gate, Marcus felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. A text from Carla: "Car waiting for you upon arrival. We're in conference room B at the LAX corporate lounge. See you soon." He texted back a quick confirmation. Then he stood, collected his carry-on from the overhead bin, and waited for the plane to come to a complete stop. Captain Halston, following standard procedure, made a final announcement thanking everyone for choosing Global Skies Airlines. While he spoke, a flicker of pride crept into his voice, as it often did after a flawless landing. Passengers started to disembark. Halston remained in the cockpit, confident that his day's work was done. The pilot gave no thought to the possibility that any single passenger, especially the black man he had casually brushed aside, might have the power to change the trajectory of his career. Outside, a warm California sun illuminated the tarmac. Marcus stepped off the jet bridge into the terminal. A neatly dressed chauffeur, holding a placard with his name, waited near the arrival gate. He gave Marcus a polite nod and led him through a private corridor to the Global Skies 6P lounge, where Carla Hutchinson stood waiting, clipboard in hand and a welcoming smile on her face. "Marcus, so glad you made it safely," she greeted, gesturing to a glass-walled conference room. Inside, an elongated table with plush seats awaited them, and on the table rested a small stack of documents that Marcus recognized as the official acquisition paperwork. Carla offered him a seat and poured a bottle of sparkling water. "I assume you had a comfortable flight." Marcus chose his words carefully. The flight itself was smooth apart from some turbulence. Service was generally good. "I did have an interesting interaction with the pilot, though." Carla's smile faltered slightly. "Oh? Care to elaborate?" Marcus paused, measuring how much detail to offer. "Let's finalize this paperwork first. Then I'll share my experience. One step at a time," Carla nodded. Though her curiosity was piqued, the immediate priority was to ensure that the multi-million-dollar agreement was properly executed. Unbeknownst to Captain Halston, still on the plane, shutting down systems and preparing to disembark, his day was about to take a turn he'd never expected. Back in the cockpit, Halston flipped switches to power down the aircraft. He thanked DeWitt for her assistance and let out a long breath, satisfied with another successful flight. As the crew packed up, Halston stepped into the forward galley, intending to say a quick goodbye to the flight attendants. Camilla Rise, the lead attendant, stopped him. "Captain, I just thought you might want to know there was something unusual about that passenger in 2A, Marcus Thompson. I overheard him on a phone call. I think he's connected to our corporate office." Halston stiffened slightly. Connected how? He felt a stab of worry, thinking back to the brief glimpses of corporate documents. Not sure, Camilla replied. But the VP of Corporate Relations called him personally mid-flight. That's not something you see every day. Halston tried to shrug it off. Probably just an investor or a consultant. But a trickle of unease slipped under his skin. Not long after, Halston grabbed his flight bag and walked down the aisle toward the open door. Outside, the pilot who would take the plane on its next rotation was already waiting to do his checks. Halston exchanged formalities, stepping into the terminal with a sense of relief that his shift was done. He had no reason to linger, at least that's what he thought. The terminal's hum enveloped him as he headed for the crew lounge to handle some paperwork before leaving the airport. Meanwhile, in the VIP lounge's conference room B, Carla handed Marcus a pen. The final contract was a robust document that outlined the extent of Marcus's investment, the voting power he would hold, and the responsibilities the airline had to him as a major stakeholder. The figures were staggering, but Marcus had thoroughly reviewed them beforehand. He signed each page with steady resolve. Carla beamed. Marcus, welcome to the Global Skies family. We're incredibly excited about what your expertise in tech and innovation can bring to our airline. She extended her hand, and he shook it. A sense of triumph and gravity settled over him. He was now an official part owner of one of the nation's leading airlines. Letting the moment sink in, Carla gestured for an attendant to bring over a chilled bottle of sparkling cider, alcohol-free, at Marcus's request, and 2 flutes. They toasted to the future, clinking glasses lightly, but the celebratory mood carried an undercurrent of seriousness. Marcus placed his glass down. Carla, about the flight. The pilot, Captain Halston, was, well, let's say he was less than welcoming. He briefly recounted the subtle dismissiveness and how it made him feel. Carla's brow furrowed. I'm so sorry to hear that. This is the last thing we want for any passenger, let alone someone who's just become a major part of our company. Do you want to file a formal complaint? Marcus paused, swirling the cider in his glass. I want to speak with him first, if possible. Sometimes a face-to-face conversation can resolve more than paperwork. Carla nodded, her expression a mixture of relief and apprehension. I'll see if I can arrange that. Minutes later, Carla was on the phone with the airline's operations center. Halston, who was about to exit the airport, received a message from his supervisor, report to the 60 lounge immediately. Confusion and a twinge of worry shadowed his features. Usually, being summoned to the VIP lounge unannounced wasn't a great sign. He tried to think if he had made any major errors during the flight. Apart from the turbulence, everything had gone smoothly, or so he believed. Still in uniform, Halston made his way through the terminal, his footsteps echoing over polished floors. He flashed his ID badge to pass through a restricted area and arrived at the VIP lounge reception desk. Carla stepped out to greet him, her polite demeanor tinged with evident seriousness. Captain, thank you for coming so quickly. Would you mind joining us in Conference Room B for a brief discussion? Halston nodded, swallowing hard. The door to the conference room swung open, and there, standing calmly, was Marcus Thompson. Dressed in his impeccable suit, contract documents neatly stacked beside him, he met Halston's eyes with a gaze that was neither hostile nor friendly. Halston's confusion deepened. Why would the passenger he'd casually dismissed be waiting here, flanked by Carla Hutchinson, the VP of Corporate Relations? Carla cleared her throat. Captain Halston, this is Mr. Marcus Thompson. But Halston never let her finish. Something about Marcus being in the lounge and the formal setup triggered a realization that this meeting was important. He tried to maintain composure. We've already met on the plane, he said stiffly. Marcus offered a curt nod. Carla decided to cut to the chase. Marcus is a major investor in Global Skies. As of today, he officially holds a significant stake in our airline. He also had some concerns about his experience on Flight 741. Halston felt his blood run cold. His mind reeled at the notion that the very passenger he had dismissed was not just some random traveler, but a newly minted part owner of the airline he served. Marcus spoke, his voice calm but resolute. "Captain Halston, I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me. I wanted to talk about the interaction we had, or rather, the one we didn't have. You made an effort to greet many of the first-class passengers, but when it came to me, you were noticeably different. Dismissive, even." Halston's cheeks flushed. He opened his mouth to protest, but all he managed was a stammer. In that moment, he could almost hear the walls of his pride cracking. He had no idea how far this conversation would go, or what it might cost him. Marcus continued, maintaining a level tone. "I'm not looking for an apology for my ego's sake. It's just that these are the types of experiences that many people of color face. Small microaggressions that signal we're not worthy of the same courtesy as others. It might seem insignificant to you, but it carries weight for me and for everyone who might be treated similarly." Halston's mind raced. He wanted to defend himself, to say he wasn't racist, that he treats all passengers fairly. But the truth was glaring. He had singled Marcus out, even if unconsciously. He struggled to find words. I'm sorry you felt that way," he finally uttered. The phrase sounded hollow, even to his own ears. Carla interjected, her voice firm. "This is precisely why Global Skies invests in diversity training. We expect our employees, especially those in leadership positions, to treat all passengers with equal respect. Captain Halston, we hold you to a high standard." Marcus gave a slight nod, acknowledging Carla's words before continuing. "I wanted you to know how your actions affected me, and also the potential consequences they can have on the company's reputation. I'm in a position now where I can help shape policies and culture here at Global Skies. My preference is to improve matters, not punish people. But that depends on your willingness to reflect and change." Halston felt a wave of shame, regret, and a stubborn desire to defend himself, all colliding at once. The pilot who once commanded a Boeing 747 without flinching now found himself powerless before a passenger he had underestimated. Silence thickened in the room. Carla looked between the two men, sensing the gravity of the moment. Finally, she turned to Halston. "Captain, do you have anything you wish to say? Our airline's future relationship with Mr. Thompson is paramount. We want a constructive path forward." Halston exhaled a shaky breath. "I recognize that my behavior was inappropriate. To be honest, I didn't realize how I came across. 1. I've never had anyone call me out like this before, but I see now that ignoring or dismissing someone is its own form of bias." His words sounded stiff, but there was an undercurrent of genuine contrition. Marcus studied him, gauging the sincerity. "I'm not here to destroy your career, Captain, but I do expect accountability. People need to understand that biases, whether overt or subtle, have no place in professional settings." Carla nodded, relieved that Marcus was aiming for reform rather than immediate retribution. She spoke softly but firmly. "Captain, the airline will require you to undergo advanced cultural sensitivity and diversity training. We will also be reviewing passenger feedback on previous flights. If there's a pattern, further disciplinary action may follow. For now, consider this a formal notice to adjust your conduct." A swirl of emotions tugged at Halston. He was humiliated, worried, and oddly grateful that he hadn't been outright fired on the spot. The pilot realized this moment could have been far worse. He mustered a subdued response. "I accept." Marcus let out a slight sigh, feeling the heaviness of the confrontation begin to dissipate. "Thank you for hearing me out, Captain Halston. I hope this marks a change in how we all handle moments of unconscious bias in the future." He then shifted his attention to Carla. Now, if there's nothing else, I have another meeting to attend regarding some innovative tech integrations for Global Skies. Carla smiled, grateful for the civil tone. Of course, Marcus. We appreciate your understanding and your willingness to help us grow. I'll follow up personally with any updates on this matter. She turned to Halston. Captain, you're dismissed. I suggest you take some time to reflect. We'll be in touch. Halston gave a brief nod. With shoulders slumped, he exited the room. Outside, the hallway felt colder and lonelier than when he'd entered. His stomach churned with a cocktail of embarrassment and self-reproach. For the first time in his career, he was forced to confront the fact that his behavior, unnoticed or excused for years, was now under the microscope of someone who had the authority to shape the very airline he worked for. Meanwhile, Marcus remained in the conference room to finalize some additional details with Carla. Their conversation shifted to strategies for marketing, tech updates to the fleet, and the importance of an inclusive culture. Deep down, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. His journey was no longer just about personal success. It was about paving the way for a more equitable environment, starting with a single flight and a single pilot who had learned a valuable lesson the hard way. A short while later, Captain Halston found himself in the crew lounge, changed out of his pilot's uniform and into casual attire. He sank into a chair, still trying to process what had transpired. Many of his co-workers were bustling about, preparing for their next flights or heading home, unaware of the life-altering confrontation that had just taken place. He glanced at his phone. No messages from management yet, but he knew it was only a matter of time. His supervisor would likely call him in for a formal meeting, or at the very least to inform him of the mandatory training. Word might spread among the piloting community, tarnishing his once spotless reputation. Halston thought of the countless interactions he'd had with passengers over the years, how many times he might have overlooked or underserved people based on subconscious judgments. The realization made him feel uneasy. In the quiet, he could almost hear his own heartbeat pounding with regret. Meanwhile, out in the main terminal, Marcus emerged from the VIP lounge, accompanied by Carla, who was beaming with cautious optimism. Together, they walked toward an awaiting black sedan that would transport Marcus to his hotel. Their conversation was light, even hopeful, discussing new product launches and philanthropic initiatives. But in the back of Marcus's mind was the recollection of the pilot's expression when he learned who Marcus truly was. It was a reminder of how quickly tables can turn in life and how important it is to stand firm in one's dignity. Later that evening, Marcus checked into his hotel suite, overlooking the Los Angeles skyline. He sank into a comfortable armchair, replaying the day's events. He felt a mixture of exhaustion and quiet satisfaction. On one hand, he had successfully secured a substantial role in shaping Global Sky's future. On the other, he had confronted a subtle form of bigotry and set the wheels in motion for real accountability. He called his mother, a tradition he maintained whenever something important happened in his life. "Mama, you won't believe the day I've had," he began, describing the flight, the pilot's dismissiveness, and the dramatic reveal in the VIP lounge. His mother listened intently, her voice trembling with pride. "Marcus, the first, so proud of you. You stood up for yourself, and for others who might not have had the chance. That's how change happens, one incident, one conversation at a time." Marcus nodded, his chest swelling with gratitude. The memory of Halston's stammering apology flickered through his mind. He wondered if the pilot would truly learn from this or simply resent him for the embarrassment. Regardless, Marcus recognized that the journey toward equity was ongoing. He had taken a firm step today, and there would be many more steps to come. Half a city away, Captain Halston stood in his modest suburban home, dinner untouched on the table, the day's revelations swirling like a storm. For once, He questioned whether he was truly the upstanding professional he believed himself to be. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but a necessary one if he ever hoped to grow beyond the biases that had just cost him dearly. In the following weeks, Halston found himself enrolled in an extensive diversity and cultural sensitivity program mandated by Global Skies. The sessions were led by professionals who specialized in uncovering implicit biases. Through workshops, discussion groups, and video modules, Halston was exposed to scenarios eerily similar to his own, but from perspectives he'd never truly considered. He watched testimonies from passengers describing the sting of being overlooked or treated differently by airline staff. He read studies showing how subtle discrimination erodes trust and loyalty. He also participated in role-playing exercises, which felt awkward but were eye-opening. Slowly, Halston's defenses began to break down, replaced by a dawning realization of how ingrained these biases could be. News of the incident had spread quietly among some pilots and cabin crew. Whispers circulated about how Halston had nearly jeopardized his career by disrespecting a VIP passenger who turned out to be a major investor. Some scorned Halston for letting a personal bias overshadow common courtesy. Others empathized, noting how easy it was to slip into unthinking behavior. Regardless, Halston's situation served as a cautionary tale for everyone in the airline. You never know who's sitting in first class or in economy, for that matter. Meanwhile, Marcus maintained a discreet presence, working mostly behind the scenes on new initiatives for Global Skies. One day, a memo went out announcing a fresh wave of inclusivity training across all levels of the airline. Marcus's fingerprints were all over it. The pilot's misstep had ignited a larger push for reform. Months slipped by, and in that span, Marcus Thompson continued to flourish in his dual roles as a tech entrepreneur and a key investor in Global Skies. Behind the scenes, he actively worked with Carla Hutchinson and other executives to roll out a new wave of policies aimed at fostering inclusivity and cultural sensitivity throughout the airline. These initiatives range from employee workshops to broader recruitment outreach programs, all built on the premise that no passenger or crew member should ever feel marginalized. The results were quietly transformative. Flight attendants began to report better rapport with travelers, even during high-stress situations like delays or turbulence. Gate agents were trained on how to address subtle discrimination issues, such as when certain passengers were questioned more intensely or spoken to with less warmth. Surveys indicated a steady rise in passenger satisfaction. Some lauded the friendlier environment, while others noted an intangible sense of respect permeating the cabins. Although it was still an ongoing journey, the airline's newfound spirit of empathy and awareness was becoming tangible. Meanwhile, Captain Gregory Halston underwent a profound personal and professional shift. The diversity training sessions he was required to attend were more extensive than any he had experienced before. He found himself reading case studies and engaging in role-playing exercises that forced him to confront his own preconceptions head-on. Faced with real-world scenarios from a child traveling alone who looked nothing like the parent who dropped them off, to an elderly passenger with an accent, Halston learned how unconscious judgments could influence how he addressed or assisted them. Initially, the training was uncomfortable and humiliating. He hated feeling exposed, as though someone was shining a spotlight on every flaw he'd successfully hidden for years. Yet, slowly, Halston recognized a truth: hidden biases don't vanish on their own, and ignoring them only lets them fester. In daily life, he started noticing small gestures that made a world of difference, holding eye contact with every passenger, flashing a sincere smile, or simply asking, "How can I help you today?" In time, these became habit rather than forced politeness. Several co-pilots and flight attendants observed these changes with cautious optimism. Some of them even approached Halston privately to commend him. "I don't know what's gotten into you," said one senior attendant, "but keep it up. Morale really matters on these flights." Such feedback fueled Halston's transformation, reassuring him that his efforts were neither superficial nor wasted. On a brisk morning at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, nearly the same setting where the story had first begun, Halston was preparing to pilot another cross-country flight. His heart gave a small jolt when he saw Marcus Thompson's name on the first-class manifest. He remembered vividly the conversation that had shaken his world, but this time, rather than dreading the encounter, he felt a resolve to show Marcus who he had become. When the time came to greet the passengers, Halston stepped out of the cockpit, his voice calm and genuine as he spoke to each person. Arriving at Marcus's seat, he extended his hand with no trace of hesitation. "Mr. Thompson," he said, voice warm, "welcome aboard. I appreciate you flying with us again." Marcus returned the handshake, meeting Halston's gaze. Though the moment was brief and unceremonious, it held a quiet significance. In that gesture, Halston conveyed humility and respect, while Marcus acknowledged a man who had chosen to grow from his mistakes. In that simple exchange, firm handshake to firm handshake, both men understood that change was possible. No matter the baggage one carried, there was always room to unpack, reassess, and step forward with clearer eyes. Their story, once marked by prejudice and regret, was gradually being rewritten into one of understanding, progress, and a shared belief that even the skies themselves could become more welcoming for everyone. Thank you for joining us for this dramatic tale of how a single flight exposed hidden biases and sparked a powerful reckoning. If you've ever felt the sting of someone's prejudice or witnessed an undercurrent of unfairness, you understand the significance of what happened between Captain Halston and Marcus Thompson. It's a reminder that even small gestures, like a withheld greeting, can carry huge weight, and that those who underestimate others based on stereotypes may one day discover they've underestimated the very person who holds the keys to their future. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with friends who appreciate a compelling story, and subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking content. Every click and share helps us continue bringing you stories that inspire empathy, reflection, and the possibility of real change. Let's keep the